Welcome back. Today marks a new phase in South Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The move to lockdown level 3 meant many people returned to work today. Still, restaurants, beauty parlours, some small businesses remain closed. Is government providing the right support as we reopen up the economy? To discuss, we're joined by Xhanti Payi, Director of Nascence Advisory. Xhanti, thank you for being with us. As a financial watcher, are you heartened to see the economy opening up, or knowing that millions more could go back to work today?
Good evening, Francis. I think I'm very, very happy, actually, because I think we finally have the opportunity to get people back to work and, of course, improving the prospects for the economy. We know that this has had a devastating effect, especially the actions we've taken over the past few months. So it is quite encouraging. But, of course, there are still concerns in terms of safety, given the different industries and whether or not they are actually prepared to keep the safety standards. But I think, by and large, we have to all be happy.
I guess it's hard to tell right now who's complying, who's not, but there will be outbreaks and then people saying to their employers, you didn't protect us. That's going to happen.
Yes, and I think there's two things to that. The first one, of course, is the liability, I guess, workers have to, employers have to take. But also, I think the concern is that once the outbreaks happen, then it reverses all the gains that we are trying to get, because, of course, then you have to close factories, you've got to close workspaces, and therefore we no longer actually get what we think we're going to get. So, I think we've seen this already. In the health sector, so where a lot of people, we've had hospitals being closed because there was lack of compliance and safety. We know that this is the same thing we've seen in the mining sector, where we started out with this experiment, and the outcomes, they have been dire, in the sense that we've had now to go back to people actually, the mines being closed and people not being at work. So hopefully that we don't take this, we don't accelerate it, so that actually we balance out the gains instead of moving too fast, and then in the end actually having no economic activity at all. And of course, I think one of the things that many people have argued is that because our economy is its people, if a lot of them get ill or people start dying in workspaces, that will affect the mood in terms of work, and therefore actually productivity will not be as high as we would like it to be.
Of course, morale. So what you're saying is it's good business to really think about the health and stopping the spread of COVID-19, although it's expensive for small businesses.
It is for small businesses, but I suspect that small businesses are the more nimble ones, than they are actually the ones that are probably going to be able to do protection better than others. But of course, depending, and I think the one thing that we have to do, we've already had that we are trying to do a recovery of sorts and want to go back to normal life. I think we have to now understand, and every single business has to understand, that we are not going back to normal life. Actually, what we are doing is to chart a new path. Many businesses, obviously, over the past few months, have already changed their business activities. Where people were manufacturing luxury goods, they're now manufacturing protective gear, for example. So there are opportunities to say it's not business as usual. We are not actually attempting a recovery. We are actually attempting a restructure. And I think if that starts from each business, then we are going to be in a much better way. We know, for example, that we are going to have a lot of people being retrenched because businesses are not going to be able to cope, many businesses. And if you think from that perspective, then businesses have to think about, for example, how they communicate to their employees, how they structure their business, how they make sure that they talk to their creditors. So it's a whole new game that we are facing. And so going back to normal life should not be an option. And so businesses, as they go into this, should actually think about, how do we do better? How do we do things differently? That people are safe, but also we are coping with the stresses of a completely new environment.
There are still businesses closed. Government has explained that some professions can't meet the 1.5 meters social distancing criteria. But if you're a hairdresser and you can't make a living, and you think you could wear a mask and sanitize and take all the precautions, but you can go to church with 50 people, do you agree with those commentators? There's a fundamental economic contradiction there?
There's a contradiction. I think one of the problems we face has been the question about consistently to say, what can we do? And how do we ask businesses themselves? I think in the president, when he was announcing the opening of churches, said something remarkable. He said, they've had the opportunity to talk to these businesses, and they've asked the businesses themselves, the churches, how they're going to go about doing these things. And if you think about it, if you were to ask a hairdresser, for example, okay, we will allow you to go back. What are the key things you're going to do to make sure you protect yourself and you protect your customers? I suspect the hairdressers would be able to come up with things. We know, for example, that you can work, for example, from behind the screen. We've seen how nurses and doctors do this, with protective gear, with masks, with some of those plastic screens on their faces. So you can do different things. And we can, again, the point is that we are going to have to think differently. So we don't have to think of hairdressers the way we thought about them before, closer, much more in terms of conversation. But that actually now they have to, because they are in this environment, they could do things differently. They could dress differently. They could cover themselves. Much like health workers protect themselves because they're in close proximity to people. So I think that and this is true of any other industry, that if they are allowed to define their own activities and how they're going to do protection, and then the government does monitoring, we are going to be in a much better space, much quicker than actually the government thinking of those regulations. And I think that has been the case in some sectors in which the DTI, for example, went and asked retailers how they're going to do this. I know this has been true also in the construction sector. So I think in order for us to actually move forward, we're going to have to do a little bit more in terms of actually trusting business to bring forward some plans to actually prevent this, because they stand to lose more than anybody else in this process.
And of course, the restaurants have put forward various applications. Just very quickly, there must be huge uncertainty. There's no idea when we'll go to a lockdown 2 or 1. Even after that, we haven't hit the peak, so we could go back to lockdown level 4 or 5. For any business, it must make decision-making incredibly difficult.
No, definitely. But I think one of the things that businesses have to do, I think for the longest time, business has been structured in such a way that it didn't actually risk was not such a big thing. But we have now realized that risk is a key thing in terms of risk for your revenue, risk for your people, and that actually we have to think about those structures much more. So it is actually opening us up to better thinking. So I think there is an opportunity here to look at the way we've been doing business, and we look at the future, and then to look also the way in which the interaction between government and business and customers actually talk to each other and workers. And I think that is what is forcing us to do. So I think, labor unions, for example, have a much closer role to play themselves in terms of actually making sure business associations. So there's a whole group of people that can do these things better. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to move forward. I think, especially as we go ahead, there are going to be lives lost as we move forward. The question is, how then does business, with workers, with labor, actually chart a path in terms of how we actually communicate about how we're going to confront these lost lives, how we're going to work with communities, how we're going to work with employers, how we're going to even, I think in a sense we have, for example, this idea that, the UIF will pay for loss of life or injury at work or infection at work. How will we know where people were infected, and how will we actually undertake the negotiations of those things? So I think it is very important that we actually foster better relationships, better communication, and economic thinking that will help us out of this problem.
Yeah, lots still to navigate, and the economy may be opening up, but the worst still to come in terms of the toll. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Xhanti Payi, Director of Nascence Advisory.